NC Pork, good for the plate, great for the state. Welcome back to another edition of Time Out, the Tobacco Road Basketball Show here on the North Carolina Sports Network. It's March Madness time, and again, that means that bacon and basketball is back, North Carolina's top bracket contest. It's free to play, so go to ESPN.com's Tournament Challenge and register now. Join the North Carolina Sports Network group in both the men's and the women's bracket challenges and make your picks now through about 12:15 on Thursday afternoon. We will have winners, champions, if you will, in both the men's and the women's challenges, and they will receive a year's supply of North Carolina bacon courtesy of NC Pork. We'll also crown the North Carolina Hoops Hog, and we'll give a special trophy to the combined winner of the men's and women's bracket challenges. It's called Bacon and Basketball here on the North Carolina Sports Network. Last week, the North Carolina Sports Network was on site at both the ACC tournament in Charlotte and the North Carolina High School Athletic Association basketball championships for 1A, 2A, 3A, and 4A. They were held in the Twin Cities of Winston-Salem at the Lawrence Joel Veterans Memorial Coliseum. And I just wanted to take a time out to say congratulations to Commissioner Q. Tucker and her staff, Site Director Rhonda Dreibelbus, Evan Sauer, and Brandon Moree for doing such an outstanding job of putting together this championship, and to watch 8 different champions in both boys and girls basketball being crowned. It was an amazing atmosphere. North Carolina basketball here at the high school level is outstanding. And to have that type of a showcase event for all of our prep basketball players to aspire to be, I tell you, this is so much better than when they were spreading out the championships to all these different college locations here and there. It doesn't have to be in Chapel Hill. It doesn't have to be in Raleigh at NC State. It doesn't have to be anywhere but Winston-Salem, because this is a place, this is a town that truly embraced seeing big-time crowds at a venue that was appropriate for the size. Nobody wants to play in a 21,000 seat arena when you have 8,000 people. But the way they configured the Joel Coliseum, the North Carolina High School Athletic Association gets an A1 for their staging of our 2025 North Carolina High School Basketball Championships. Great job, NCHSAA. As always, we appreciate your engagement with all of our content here at the North Carolina Sports Network. We have an all-new website at ncsportsnetwork.com where you can get exclusive content from David Glenn not found anywhere else on the web. Articles, features, interviews, you name it, we've got it at ncsportsnetwork.com. And one new feature is our new NC 24/7 online radio station that has classic David Glenn Show episodes streaming around the clock 24 hours a day. Great interviews with folks like Coach K, Roy Williams, Mike Tyson, Barack Obama, John Grisham, tennis star Chris Evert, Lou Holtz, and my favorite football coach of all time, the head ball coach himself, Steve Spurrier, formerly of Duke. You can follow us on social media at the NC Sports Network at Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, and LinkedIn, plus our incredible YouTube channel, which is closing in on now 32,000 subscribers. You can also find our content at favorite podcast outlets such as Spotify, Apple, iHeart, and Amazon Music, along with YouTube. We invite you to like, comment, follow, subscribe, and join our growing roster of supporters. While bacon and basketball is going on now, we are only a few weeks away from our North Carolina pork-powered bacon and baseball tour. It gets started at Wilmington on Friday, April 11th for the big UNC Wilmington Seahawks homestand against CAA rival William and Mary. Come see head coach Randy Hood and his Seahawks baseball team in action, meet David Glenn, and get a special edition bacon and baseball t-shirt. Tickets are available now at the UNCW Athletics website, uncwsports.com. And finally, we're excited to be partnering with NC by Train and Amtrak to promote the best way to travel to sporting events here in the Bold North State, as we will be hopping on the train this April for the return of NASCAR to the Rock, as the NASCAR Xfinity Series and the Craftsman Truck Series will be at Rockingham Speedway. The Rock, it is back. Stay tuned for more details on this one, as we're going to have a lot of fun this year traveling the North Carolina rails and showcasing the best in sports with NASCAR, the upcoming PGA Championship here in Charlotte, and all the way into the fall, and the return of both the NFL and college football. North Carolina by Train. Train travel is your all-access pass to adventure on North Carolina's Piedmont and Carolinian trains. And it's even better when exploring with friends and family by your side. Share fares are making it easy to bring the whole crew by helping you save with each +1. Learn more about this fun way to travel the Old North State at ncbytrain.org. Our starting lineup here on Timeout is led by our 38-year ACC veteran journalist, attorney, entrepreneur, and two-time North Carolina Sportscaster of the Year, the one and only DG David Glenn. And the head coach of our show is the former Seton Hall Pirate player from the old school Big East, former assistant coach at Wake Forest, App State, Tulsa, where he was an NIT champion, Tennessee, Pitt, UCLA, and head coach for a dozen years in the West Coast Conference out at Santa Clara. We're talking about our esteemed basketball mind, Coach Kerry Keating. And I'm Mike Waddell, former D1 Director of Athletics at Towson University, Senior Administrator at Cincinnati, Arkansas, and Illinois, and three-time Pro Team Sports President. I also started out back in the old days as a radio play-by-play guy with 5 different NCAA championship teams at the University of North Carolina and the University of Virginia. We'll kick off this week's show with a brief look back, because we're mainly focused forward here during our Bacon and Basketball Month, but we're going to look back to the ACC tournament of a week ago. This presented by NC Pork, raising the bacon, raising the bar. And gentlemen, Duke was weakened by injuries to Cooper Flagg and Malik Brown, but the Devils were still too much to handle for the rest of the ACC as they cruised to their second Atlantic Coast Conference tournament championship in the last 3 years, and the 14th out of the last 26 with their win over Louisville and first-year head coach Pat Kelsey on Saturday night. DG, you were in the Spectrum Center, and this was pretty much the Blue Devils dance party all the way through from start to finish.
Yeah, Mike, and I like that big picture stat you mentioned there, because whether you look at it from 60,000 feet or whether you get all the way into the nitty-gritty of this year's roster at Duke, as you said, a bit shorthanded without Cooper Flagg and Malik Brown, it's all good news all the time for the Blue Devils, because in the 72-year history of the ACC tournament, there has never been a run by any program like the one you described, where of the last 26 ACC tournaments, it is Duke with 14 wins, and it is everyone else combined with 12. That is humbling to the rest of the ACC, and that is an incredible accomplishment for Duke. When you take it a little bit more narrowly, how was that succession plan going to go from Mike Krzyzewski, one of the greatest of all time, to a very young man who had never been a head coach in Jon Scheyer? Answer, at least in one category, 2 of his first 3 ACC tournaments, Jon Scheyer has been the coach cutting down the nets. And when you get specifically to this season and those 5 days that we were there together at the Spectrum Center in Charlotte, you have to give this year's Duke team a lot of credit. They are one of the favorites to win the national championship, and we'll get into the particulars of the other favorites around the nation. But when you can win that way, and to the Devils' credit, there was some game pressure against Georgia Tech, even in the quarterfinals. There was a switch in momentum from what looked like a Duke blowout to a lot of game pressure in that victory over North Carolina. that went down to that crazy set of circumstances in the final minute of regulation, and Jalen Withers' massive mental error stepping into the lane to kind of take Duke off the hook for whatever possibility may have been to come. And then there was some game pressure in the Blue Devils championship game over Louisville. But when you can do all those things without Cooper Flagg hardly playing at all, without Malik Brown, probably your best player off the bench, it's a reminder that these Blue Devils really do go 8 or 9 deep. Con Knippel was the best player in this tournament and got that MVP honor. He showed why I had him on my All-ACC first team. He didn't make first team, but he was the 5th guy on my ballot. Tyrese Proctor did not play great in the first 2 games for Duke, but when they needed him to shoot well against Louisville, he was fantastic in that capacity. Sion James does not put up huge numbers, but he is a physically imposing defender. He's a very good assist man, and if you dare him to score, he can do that as well. And then the freshman big man, Kaman Malawach, he was phenomenal as a shot blocker and as a rebounder, and at times he contributed offensively. When they needed some threes off the bench, Isaiah Evans delivered as a freshman. When they needed some minutes from a big man off the bench in the absence of Malik Brown, Patrick Gongba, a guy who hadn't played much in the first half of the season, not only was good, he was very good and very reliable and unafraid and physically and mentally tough. This Duke team has a legit shot at following up a regular season ACC title and an ACC tournament title with certainly a Final Four run and maybe a national championship. And that is a credit to the super smooth transition from Mike Krzyzewski to John Shire. We'll get more into the Blue Devils matchups today and in coming shows, but this is a really good basketball team that is going to be playing well into the month of March.
Yeah, DG, as a former coach and someone who went through some transitions, obviously at some very high level places, albeit as an assistant, but also followed up as a head coach to a longtime coach who had been in the place for decades and has a name on the floor, if you will. Anytime you're following up a coach with a name on the floor, there's added pressure to that as a coach. I can't be more effusive in the praise that I can heap on Duke for handling this transition in a way that seemingly is going to be smooth moving forward. It's one thing to find the right person that can handle the place, right? You get an alum, you get a former coach, you have someone local. There's all a lot of different intangibles that can go into that. But in this day and age of transitioning into how college basketball is being run, how it's being organized, how it's being coached, managed, they're checking all the boxes at Duke. And I think that the one thing that stands out when you strip all those things down as it relates to this year, and as you mentioned, the opportunities that presented themselves via the injuries, obviously, to the best player, not just in the ACC and on their team, but maybe the country and the presumptive #1 pick in Cooper Flagg. We see this happen in the NBA all the time. Major main players go out and somehow the team still finds a play to win. And I use the NBA as an example because those are the best players in the world. And by and large, they may not be as good as the superstar players, but they're still really dang good. And they just don't get the amount of time and minutes because there's so much to go around. And I'm using it as an example because we're transitioning now into college basketball into that type of model if you can manage your roster properly year to year. And this isn't something where we have 3 or 4 freshmen who've developed into sophomores or seniors. These are just talented players that if the staff does their work and has them on the roster to begin with, and then takes that effort and multiplies it by developing them, but keeping them ready in that next man up mentality. And they're really good. And as Duke has proven, they are. You kind of don't have that fall off even in a time where you're playing for a championship. Now, that's an ACC championship. Now we're talking about an NCAA championship. When will Cooper Flagg be back? It really won't make a difference in the first round based on that talent. As it starts to get whittled down to the Sweet 16, and I think this is one thing when we look ahead, and we'll kind of revisit this in Duke's bracket, they kind of caught a little bit of a break in my estimation in terms of what their future matchups could be as it results to the talent on the floor. But I got to look back and just say, you know, the MVP is really the staff at Duke. I mean, for them to be able to handle this, for a guy like Con Knippel to step up the first time, 28 and 8 assists, and then come back in the finals of a tournament and have this distribution of talent step up. You talked about Proctor, obviously Malawach. You know, I think that the Evans addition is going to be huge and really show its colors here early on in the tournament because Cooper Flagg's 35 minutes get redistributed. But when they're able to pick up that slack from a production standpoint, this is why we're talking about Duke potentially being a national championship. And if they can overcome some hot teams and get themselves into the Final Four in San Antonio with a healthy roster, they're going to be really, really tough to beat.
They really should be. And when you look at just the ACC tournament as a whole, Duke by far and away, we talked about that big stat, 14 titles out of the last 26 years. They are a program that is built to sustain the turnover from year to year. Two other programs that I was really impressed with, though they didn't take home the championship in Charlotte, were SMU. Wow. Andy Enfield, the way he's building that program, you can really get the sense that they have a focused goal and they have the big time war chest of money behind them too. Do not underestimate the ponies. And also Louisville, they make it all the way to the championship game, guys. Pat Kelsey, ACC Coach of the Year, he's done a magnificent job, but both of those programs seem to really be focused. And the one thing that I noticed sitting as close, David, as you and I were behind the benches in these games, you can really learn a lot about a program, the way their bench behaves, the way everybody interacts on the bench. And in both of those cases, SMU and Louisville, these are very controlled, very mature, very emotionally contained benches. Not that they don't have passion, but they're not losing their heads out there. And that's really a credit back to Pat Kelsey and Andy Enfield.
Yeah, I agree, Mike. I once asked Brad Brownell, who's become a friend of the show for a long time, was it a bad sign that I, as a youth soccer coach, was losing my voice because I was yelling to my kids so often? And he said, he was laughing, but he said, yeah, it's a bad sign because that means you didn't coach them up well enough before the game that you think they know what they're doing while they're out there. So you got to keep yelling at them. And you and I being, 6 feet away from the visiting team's bench for all those games in Charlotte at the ACC tournament, I saw just at one end of the spectrum, Red Autry of Syracuse was animated and yelling and communicating to his players nonstop. And I'm not saying there's only one way to do this, but Andy Enfield was composed and basically took the persona of somebody who was thinking in the back of his head, these guys know what I want. There's occasional times that I have to remind a guy that he's in the wrong place for the start of a called play, or remind my point guard that this was the defense that I called. But 90% of the time, he's got his arms folded and he's looking out there, and he just seemed like somebody who knew his players were about to do what he planned to do. And Pat Kelsey's a little more animated just as his natural personality. But the general sense was, with Chucky Hepburn, the coach on the floor, as Coach Keating often describes the point guard, Chucky Hepburn was his mouthpiece out there, so that Pat Kelsey was not jumping around like a maniac overcoaching his team. The contrasts were striking, and I agree with you. SMU has an offensive identity under Andy Enfield that's going to be fun to watch. They weren't quite good enough defensively this year, but that treasure chest that you described helped them go out and get a Boopy Miller from Wake Forest as their starting point guard, helped them get a Matt Cross, who was an all-conference player in the Atlantic 10. I thought Matt Cross was one of their best players. Obviously, Louisville had to start a roster from scratch, and they had plenty of NIL money and truly attracted a whole bunch of really good players, including proven commodities from other major conferences like a Chucky Hepburn, previously a 3-year starter at Wisconsin. So, yeah, I thought Stanford represented well. Kyle Smith is a heck of a coach of the Cardinal. They're headed to the NIT rather than the NCAA tournament. But, yeah, more good than bad, I think, in terms of those 3 new teams, with SMU and Stanford leading the way.
Yeah, I think this new generation of college coaches that we're getting ready to embark on, there'll be some carryover from the ones that are here now. There'll be a lot of new ones as well. The half-life of coaching is shrinking because of the pressures to produce financial gains from this because of the amount of money it's taking to run the program now. There's a transition time that's happening in college campuses right now to figure out how to manage all of this money that's seemingly free-flowing right now, and free-flowing in directions where they really don't know where it's going. There may not be as much of a war chest for coaches as much as there needs to be for players. There will be some balancing out, and we'll retract back to some level of an even playing field at the highest level. But from a coaching standpoint, and this is the one thing I love about it as a coach, if you're in a place that at least for what you're capable of doing, you can set everything up to be handled more than you did in the past. And if you were really good at delegation and trust and had the guys that could take care of those things, and those things were kind of more tangible, right? They were academics, they were meeting with your players, they were personal relationships, they were, recruiting and evaluating an organization for the summer into the fall, they were scheduling, they were things you could really control. There's not a lot of control until this portal presents itself into what the opportunity is for the majority of those. There are some out there that are taking advantage of it still in ways that may not be necessarily above board yet until some sort of regulation comes in. But from a coaching standpoint, what you're going to see is you're going to find out who can coach. I think you're going to really find out who can coach a team. And if he or she are able to coach the team matching to the roster they put together. Case in point, the roster that's put together for St. John's is not a very good offensive roster. It's a good roster that plays hard and defends and is no frills and takes on the mentality of Coach Pitino, and that's why they're a number 2 seed. Can you trust them to win in the tournament? That remains to be seen. My point being is there's going to be a very stylistic matchup of how these rosters are formed to what coaches can coach. And when you have that match, when you have your roster that really does come together and fit to the coach's abilities, just to purely coach, you're going to find some teams that are really, really hard to beat. And I think year to year, you may have some consistency in which teams show up as part of that group. But I think you're going to see this transient nature of it's year to year to year, and what program can manage the roster to put the coach in the best position. And in your guys' example of Coach Kelsey and Coach Enfeld, those guys can coach basketball. So you got to think that what happened this year, although in the case of Louisville, maybe slighted on the seed, in the case of SMU, maybe not there yet, those guys can coach basketball. If their departments, if their staff, if their front office, if you will, organizes it right, you're going to find out how really good of a coach they are. And I think you're spot on with these two guys. It seems like those two places, and we know that they're well funded and well supported. Can they get the organization right so that now these guys can coach? And I think you hit the nail on the head. Those are two guys we're going to find out can really coach. Can the rest of the ACC make the adjustment? Time will tell.
If you are anywhere near Wilmington, North Carolina, and looking for a little live music, a cold beer, a tangy slushy, a fun crowd, or just a taste of the good life at the beach, Jimmy's Bar in Wrightsville Beach is the place for you. Located on North Lumina Avenue, just 1 block from the sand and waves of the Atlantic Ocean, Jimmy's features a full bar with nightly beer and drink specials, and it hosts musical performers almost every day of the year. One more fun fact, Jimmy's annual Children's Bike Drive, which started in 2017, now distributes more than 1,000 bicycles and helmets per year to young people in the Wilmington area and beyond. Jimmy's Bar, your home away from home on Lumina Avenue in Wrightsville Beach.
Gentlemen, it is our favorite time of the year. It is March Madness. It is bacon and basketball time here in the Bold North State. Our annual bracket contest going on right now. You can register for free at ESPN.com. Just be sure when you join either the men's or the women's bracket challenges or both that you're joining the North Carolina Sports Network group, because we're going to give away free North Carolina bacon for a year to the winners of our men's and women's basketball challenge. And then also we're going to have a big trophy and bacon for a year to the person who has the best combined men's and women's score. That's at ESPN.com. It's the men's and women's basketball tournament bracket challenges, and it's brought to us here in the Bold North State by NC Pork, raising the bacon, raising the bar, and the ACC gets in with 4 teams. We're celebrating this like it's an actual big deal, but wow, how the times have changed. Even Dick Vitale during the ACC Tournament Championship game telecast on ESPN was lamenting how the ACC had fallen off the pace. And the committee, chaired this year by University of North Carolina Chapel Hill Director of Athletics Bubba Cunningham, delivers North Carolina to the field as an 11 seed in Dayton. They will play at 9 o'clock on Tuesday night against the Aztecs of San Diego State. Gentlemen, were you surprised that in the end, Joe Lunardi was wrong and the committee had their own say-so? The Tar Heels are back in March Madness.
When you look at this, and we're a little bit jaded because we've been following, obviously, the Tar Heels and the ACC all along. So we've had these intricate breakdowns of where they were, where they needed to be. We've seen what they've done in the last month, have a little bit more insight into just the nuances of what makes Carolina happen this year. I think from an eye test perspective, had we had a chance to really eye test and evaluate North Carolina and how they were playing versus some other teams, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not sure that I would put Carolina in the tournament just based on that. The way that they play, the type of team that they are. I didn't get a chance to really watch West Virginia play or Texas or San Diego State or even Indiana. Maybe just a little bit here and there as the season goes along. But I think that's the one thing that the committee, and remember, guys, I said this about 2 weeks ago. There was an interview with Stu Jackson, Andy Katz had. And he literally, to me, just said Carolina was in the tournament. I don't know if anybody read between the lines on that, but it might have come up. And he said who you played. I can't believe no one else in the national media picked up on that. He basically said what was going to be their driving metric. And keep in mind, this was in the middle of their ongoing meetings, and he said that. And I think he was talking about Carolina because those quad one games were sitting there since December. These aren't ones that started accumulating like they do in the SEC as you start going through the gamut of the SEC, which seemingly had everybody in quad one jacking up their quad one statistics for all of the 14 teams that are in, so to speak. Yes, they won preseason games to help that. There's a method to that madness that might be a little bit of trickeration in how you can kind of game that system. But he said Carolina was basically in. I never really felt Carolina was out, because I never felt that there was another team that was playing so well or running through the end of their conference or getting to a conference tournament final that was of the ilk of that was better than Carolina. And let's face it now, even though the losses were to Duke, Carolina did win, and there used to be an emphasis on your last 10 games. You wanted the best product on the floor at the end of the season, but this body of work seemingly became more important than the last 10 games. And this wins above bubble metric that has now become, the vernacular coming out of the committee. I think the committee was a little bit scattered in what happened. And look, guys, all this thing about Bubba Cunningham not being in the room when you discuss Carolina. So for the other 70 teams that they talked about, he was always in the room. How he addressed those other 70 teams, you can kind of draw between the lines on how he would address his own team as it related to all of these metrics. I respected the answer that the vice chair was giving in place of Bubba not being able to talk about Carolina, but there's just too many dots to connect that made you think like it was a lot easier for them to push it over the top than it was for, say, Boise or West Virginia or Indiana, just because of that representation. The whole thing about bringing big brands to the tournament. Look, you can conspiracy theory the whole thing you want. At the end of the day, the true answer to this question will come tomorrow. And it'll come in the form of them playing and how they actually play. It's either going to be a huge bust, and San Diego State's going to do everything they can defensively to make Carolina look pedestrian, or Carolina's going to just go in and win the game easily, because I don't think they'll win a close game. I think they'll either lose it badly or win it. And now all of a sudden it's like, okay, the committee looks good. It's the age-old thing that we always have. It's not a reason to expand the tournament. It's just someone always has to be in the Seth Greenberg spot. It happened to be Carolina this year.
Yeah, let's face it, guys. The Tar Heels are lucky to get in. And one reason I say that is if there was the usual number of bid stealers in other conference tournaments, where maybe we know one team is going to get in from that league, but if that one team does not win the automatic bid and somebody jumps up and steals that one, but that other team gets in anyway, we call them bid stealers, right? And some years there's 5 or 6 bid stealers around the country. If UAB had beaten Memphis on Sunday afternoon in the American Athletic Conference title game, the Tar Heels would have missed the tournament. That's how close it was. By that point, the committee had already pegged its pecking order, and the Tar Heels were the last team in. If UAB had beaten Memphis, UAB gets an auto bid, Memphis still gets in as an at-large, and the Tar Heels are out. That's how close it was. And there could have been other conference tournament results that would have bought more bids, and other teams near the bubble would have fallen below the line. So that's one thing to remember. Not every year bubble is the same. That's what's dangerous about comparing a resume from 2025 to a resume from 2019 or some other year, because some years there's 7 bid stealers and some years there's only 1 or 2. Also, I appreciate what Coach Keating said about the Bubba Cunningham factor. It is true. I'm generally speaking, in sports and beyond sports, I believe that 90+% of conspiracy theories are for people who are not very smart and lack the critical thinking skills to come up with another explanation. Conspiracy theories are taking over the world, and I think it's mostly ignorant people who believe them. It is both true that you can say that the committee executed its duties in a matter of integrity, without cheating, without any backhanded deals and TV executives lining somebody's pockets to make sure a big brand gets in. We don't have to go all the way to the conspiracy theory, but it is also fair to say what Coach Keating said. Bubba Cunningham's opinions about a whole bunch of other teams imply what he thinks about his own team. Of course, that helps shape the narrative about how much weight you put on this factor versus that factor. I will remind folks this, though. West Virginia, first team out, 2 of the 4 best wins for the Mountaineers came with a player who was out for the season with an injury. So it is fair, and it is part of the fabric of the discussions that you are allowed, in fact, should weigh in, that 2 of West Virginia's 4 best wins were with a player they will not have available for the NCAA tournament. So instead of looking at West Virginia's entire body of work, you got to look at it through that lens. So to me, it was fair to bump West Virginia out for that specific reason. He was there for 2 of their best wins, and he's not going to be there for the NCAA tournament. That matters, right? Also, I remind folks, one of the reasons that so many people were shocked that Carolina got in, the most repeated metric, probably even on our show for months, was quad 1 victories, quad 1 victories, quad 1 victories. We all know Carolina was 1-12 in quad 1 victories. I've been in a mock selection committee setting. That's not the only one on the grid, right? There's quad 1 record here, and then there's a whole bunch of other things. If you lump together the last 4 in and the first 4 out, so a total of 8 teams, closest to barely make it and the closest that ended up missing it. Of those 8 teams, the Heels were last in their quad 1 record. They were first in net. They were first in wins above bubble. They were first in KenPom, and they were first, again, among those 8 teams in non-conference strength of schedule. So talking heads can shape a narrative to a degree that is misleading, because those committee members were only looking at quad 1 record as one of the biggest factors. And those other things, much less discussed, all favored the Tar Heels. Now, in the end, would I have put the Heels in? No, they would have been one of the first 4 out. Because I think bottom line, if I were a committee member, I would say I admire the heck out of the fact that they ended up with 13 quad 1 games. But they fell short 12 of those 13 times. And I would have found somebody who had more high-end wins. That's where I start my evaluation of the team. Any team, what are your best wins? And I think the Heels failed that test. They should consider this a gift. They belonged in the conversation. The Heels belong because of those other metrics. But man, did they get the benefit of the doubt. They should consider themselves playing with house money. But I think they're a lot more dangerous than 10 seeds and 11 seeds and 12 seeds and 13 seeds and 14 seeds. And we'll see if they can pull that off starting against San Diego State.
I probably would have left Carolina out too, but I think it goes back to how I felt after that semifinal loss to Duke on Friday night, because the Tar Heels really didn't do a whole lot throughout the course of the year. They only have 1 win of any merit, and that's over a mid-UCLA team. In every game where Carolina was playing a quad 1 opponent or an equal opponent, they got down, especially against the better teams. They got down big. And you can pat them on the back and say, hey, that's a valiant comeback that you had against Duke in the semifinals of the ACC tournament. But what the heck are you doing down by 21 points in the first half of the ACC semifinal? It reminded me of that scene out of 10 Cup where Tin Cup, Roy McIlroy pars the backside at a U.S. Open qualifier. He parred the backside with a 7-iron. He looks at Don Johnson. He says, "Hey, have you ever parred the backside with a 7-iron?" He said, "Roy, it never occurred to me to try." Really, why is Carolina continually not getting better between November to December to January, February, and March, and everybody gets excited when they beat up the worst teams in the league? I'm with you exactly. It also bothers me that you'll see a lot of mid-majors, and we'll talk about this throughout the month, but a lot of mid-majors now, because of these new rules and these different postseason tournaments, you can win your regular season championship and go nowhere in the postseason. It just does seem to be a little out of whack. Obviously, the committee rewarding people who schedule good teams, but at some point, yet you really do have to win games. We will move on. North Carolina, their first game on Tuesday night. They are a 3.5-point favorite in that first 4 game against San Diego State. And the get-in cost right now, $59 in Dayton, one of the better places that you can see really cool basketball. But Carolina, a 3.5-point favorite. Guys, do you feel like that's a fair line for the Tar Heels and the Aztecs?
Well, Mike, I'll tell you this. I think it's likely to be a close game, and I know this part to be true. Carolina better be ready for some of the most intense defense it has faced this entire season when San Diego State comes to town. I think a lot of casual college basketball fans will remember Coach Brian Dutcher from his Final Four run. They actually played in the national championship game before losing to UConn. That was just 2 years ago, San Diego State. And one thing that's similar, not a lot of the same players, hardly any actually, but one thing that's similar is that the Aztecs were the best defensive team in the Mountain West Conference. They were top 15 defensively. They get out in your grill. They have a 7-footer who was the defensive player of the year in that conference, although he has been out for a while with a knee injury. He hasn't played in almost a month, but he is expected to play against the Tar Heels. Where Carolina is going to have to try to win this game is that the Aztecs are not a great offensive team. They are not a great three-point shooting team. They were next to last in their own league at only 31% beyond the arc. So it gets back to that question we've talked about many times, the Carolina backcourt chemistry. I don't think the Heels are going to have great inside-outside balance against a San Diego State team that absolutely swarms you as well as any team I've seen all year if you try to penetrate into the paint or you hit some shots. And whereas R.J. Davis has become a better three-point shooter lately, it has been a guessing game as to whether Ian Jackson's going to hit threes or not show up at all. Seth Trimble's been a fantastic defender and a driver to the basket, but he has lost confidence in his three-point shot. Jalen Withers could be the guy who goes 7 for 10 and sets the three-point record for all of Carolina history in a single game at the ACC tournament, or he could be the guy that makes mental mistakes like stepping in the lane or has a cold shooting night as he did in the aftermath of that impressive opener in Charlotte. We're not sure what we're going to get from an Elliot Cadeau offensively. Even Drake Powell, a brilliant defender and a really good player overall, the freshman, he has been up and down in terms of just his scoring and his three-point accuracy. So that's a guessing game. If Hubert Davis can get his guys to share the ball, find each other some quick open looks against a brilliant San Diego State defense, they need those threes to fall if they're going to take care of the Aztecs on Tuesday night.
And we'll go back to November, guys, to find their best wins of the season, albeit they're pretty strong ones. They beat a Creighton team and a Houston team right now. The end of the season as strong as anybody. So they're not going to be afraid of the competition. Not that they would, regardless of who was on their schedule. But David, I think you hit the nail on the head. And obviously having some familiarity a little bit more with Brian, having spent some time on the West Coast, know the type of kids that he has in his program. They are extremely defensive minded. They like the game in the 60s. When we were texting pre-show talking a little bit about this, if this is 14-8 or if it's in the teens at the 12-minute timeout, that doesn't bode well for the Tar Heels. And we already talked about their propensity to get down early in the game. They need to get off to a really good start, and they need to have shots going in, or at the very least need to establish some defensive presence to go up man for man and make it a defensive slugfest, at least early on. I don't think that can last the entire game. That definitely favors San Diego State. And I think this is something that you're going to find out. It's not going to be a very aesthetically pleasing game unless Carolina finds himself getting stops, getting out in transition, finding whoever's making shots. And I think in this case, it would be very wise of Hubert and staff to really lean on RJ to really set the tone for how this game's going to go. It's a quick turnaround. It's not normal. You don't have the entire week to enjoy all the festivities and the hoopla of the opening round necessarily. It's a first four game. It's not something that we're accustomed to having Carolina in, but it's a game that if you have the right mentality, you can really take control of right away. The problem is, I think it suits San Diego State better to have that mentality than it does Carolina for the obvious reasons. It's going to be very, very interesting to see how they attack this defensive mindset that Dutcher and San Diego State have, and knowing that San Diego State has some horses that can win some big games. Again, you go all the way back to November to find those Creighton and Houston wins, but I can guarantee you they'll be leaned on by the San Diego State staff to know that there's confidence in beating. Because again, guys, when we're in this vicinity and we have familiarity with Carolina, once you remove yourself from that, and you kind of take Carolina for the brand that it is, you expect something different. It's just hard to overcome that. Carolina, Duke, Kansas, UCLA, Indiana. The kids nowadays kind of relate at a very short memory of that. Like, so they see them for the brand that they are. They may give them a little bit more respect than they kind of deserve. I don't think that's the case with this team, unfortunately, for Carolina. But it'll be very interesting to see the other part of this too, how the game is officiated. In these physical, defensive-minded games, I've always found that the officiating crew and how they adjudicate the game, if you will, early on, has more of an impact on the first round and in the first four than maybe anything else outside of shots going in or just some bonehead plays or just some things you really, can't control, but you don't do a good job of. I think that's a key factor in this. And if you're kind of looking at how this game's going to go, I think those are some things to look at early on to see how it plays out.
On Thursday, the ACC will be in action very early on in the 12:15 game on CBS. Number 8 seed Louisville against number 9 seed Creighton. So it's a battle of the birds, Coach Keating. Two really good coaches in McDermott and Kelsey. What do you expect from this one? Is this one of those classic 8-9 battles that everybody looks forward to busting up their brackets?
Yeah, the 8-9 games are always tricky because you probably get an underseeded team. You don't really get overseeded teams at 8-9. It's kind of strange how it works out that way. When you look at these two teams, top 3 teams, and two of the most historically decorated and strongest conferences, ACC and Big East. And you talked about the coaching acumen too. This is a great chess match. I think this is going to be one of the better first round games. It's really interesting when you look at Louisville getting seeded the way they did. Carolina getting in, but Duke getting the number 2 overall. Clemson getting the respect of the Duke win to get the 5 seed. Louisville getting placed in this 8 seed, 9 game. I'm not sure that they shouldn't be a little bit higher than that. So when you're looking at it from our perspective, knowing how good Louisville is, this really comes down to a testament to, was the ACC as weak as it was? Or was Louisville better regardless of how weak the rest of the conference is, given the tribulations and obviously the lack of teams in the tournament, Carolina being the last team in? I love this matchup. You've got really good players. You've got pro players on Creighton's team. Obviously, Ryan Kalkbrenner in the middle is a very unique player. Can play inside, can play outside. Stephen Ashworth from Creighton, one of the better point guards. And Greg McDermott, probably getting a lot more recognition now that he's kind of come through and established himself at Creighton as one of the better coaches in the country, and maybe a coach that may find himself on the move too when some of these higher ups have an open position. Pat Kelsey's going to earn his stripes right here. There's going to be a lot of pressure on him just to represent not just from the ACC but from Louisville. Obviously, turning that program around in a huge way in 1 year. This is going to be a great game. I think a very fun game to watch from a basketball standpoint.
Yeah, Mike, I see a great coaching matchup. I see a phenomenal point guard matchup. And then I see a challenge for Louisville to deal with Ryan Kalkbrenner. For those who haven't seen him, he's 7'1". He's 270 pounds. He's going to be an All-American. He was first team All Big East. And I believe this is true. I think he's a 4-time Defensive Player of the Year. And the first in the Big East to do that since a guy named Patrick Ewing. That means he's blocking a lot of shots. He's also very good offensively, 19 points. He shoots about 66% from the field. He's just an incredibly well-rounded player. So Pat Kelsey, he does have a couple of 6'11 guys. James Scott starts. Noah Waterman plays a ton. So he has some size to try to deal with Kalkbrenner. But beyond that, the contrast is fun because Greg McDermott's been at Creighton for 15 years now. That's how long he's had to build that program. We saw the Blue Jays in the Sweet 16 in 2021. 2 years ago, they were in the Elite Eight. Last year, they were in the Sweet 16 again. So that's a been there, done that program that we're no longer surprised when we see them in the Sweet 16 or even beyond. And obviously, Pat Kelsey, ACC Coach of the Year, but he's just starting to build a tradition at Louisville. The point guard matchup I mentioned, we all know in ACC country about Chucky Hepburn, first team All-ACC, Defensive Player of the Year. Folks probably are less familiar with Stephen Ashworth. He is a 7 assist per game guy, 16 points per game, just like Ryan Kalkbrenner was first team Big East. Ashworth was second team All Big East. So that's a good league with good players. He's really one of the nation's top assist men going against a Chucky Hepburn that's just the heart and soul of the Cardinals, especially defensively. But after being more of a distributor and a defender at Wisconsin, Chucky has also blossomed as a scorer for the Cardinals. So this is one of the best round of 64 matchups out there. I can see why it's, such a small score line in the eyes of the wise guys at Vegas. If Terrence Edwards of Louisville plays as well for the Cardinals as he did at the ACC tournament, I like Louisville to advance in this game, but it's an even matchup, two good coaches, a bunch of great players, and one of those must-see TV games, which is why I'm sure CBS decided to make it that early game on Thursday.
It should be a lot of fun to watch that. Always fun whenever the Wildcat faithful can entertain their brothers from Louisville. Always a lot of fun. Also a game that should be a lot of fun up in Providence, though it might be a little bit cold, is Clemson as the 5 seed against number 12 seed McNeese. Now, McNeese is coached by Will Wade, whose name is bandying about around coaching searches all around college basketball. Clemson, coming into this, they just did not look very on brand through what they played to during the regular season. Brad Brownell's Tigers in Charlotte just not hitting on all cylinders, and they also lost a big reserve in Dylan Hunter with a broken hand. So, guys, what do you think about the Tigers in this one? They are a 7.5-point favorite over McNeese, but I got to tell you, I think this one, like the guys were saying on CBS on the Bracket Reveal show, this could be one of those upset specials, even though we do love the Tigers.
Well, if you want to look at storylines, Mike, you can't beat this. I mean, again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but if I were a TV executive, I would love to see Brad Brownell of Clemson, who, remember, is from Indiana and has described the Indiana job as his dream job and the Hoosiers job is open. And oh, by the way, Will Wade, head coach at McNeese, has not only been on the hit list of NC State and a bunch of others, he's a Clemson graduate. He is a guy who got his coaching career started as a graduate assistant for the Tigers after graduating from Clemson University. And of course, he is a big name in part because of what he has done. 2 seasons at McNeese, 2 NCAA tournament bids, 2 Southland Conference Coach of the Year honors. That's a school, by the way, that had not been to the big dance in more than 20 years. And now Will Wade shows up and takes them there 2 years in a row. I do think Clemson is the better team, but man, I was surprised when I dug out this nugget. McNeese played at Alabama during the regular season. They did lose, but it was a 72-64 game. McNeese played Mississippi State of the SEC, another tournament team, obviously. They did lose, but it was 66-63. So on the one hand, you can say, hey, McNeese beat up on the Southland Conference, which is one of the lesser leagues in the country, right? They went 19-1 in conference play during the regular season, and then they won the tournament, of course. So they kind of padded their resume, if you will, against lesser competition. It is fair to say that the McNeese was only 6-5. That's a pretty mediocre record against everybody outside their league. However, if you can play Alabama to single digits and you can play Mississippi State to a single digit defeat, that means you're pretty darn good. And Mike, you brought up a great point from the Clemson side of the equation. Here's the bottom line to me. The four foundational pieces are as good as it gets, almost outside, I would say outside the number one seeds. Clemson's four seniors: Chase Hunter, first team All ACC; Jaden Zachary, All Defense; Ian Shefflin, also All ACC; Victor Locken, honorable mention All ACC. All four are seniors. Chase Hunter, a sixth-year senior. That is as strong an all senior four corners foundation as you can have outside the top seeds. But they need more help than they got at the ACC tournament. And that's where your point about Dylan Hunter matters a lot. Just like when John Shire needed depth, there was Isaiah Evans, freshman sharpshooter, off the bench. There was Patrick Gongba, reliable post player, off the bench, right? Brad Brownell did not have that in Charlotte. And when he needed either Chauncey Wiggins or Dell Jones or Jake Hyde-Breeder just to give him that boost off the bench, or sometimes, plugged in as an emergency starter because of an injury, he didn't get that help. And it might not, Clemson may be good enough to beat McNeese without that fully healthy roster because Hunter's not coming back from that broken hand. Chase Hunter's going to need to carry the freight. I think he'll be good enough to help them past McNeese. But this is a good McNeese basketball team. Anybody who might remember what Kadir Copeland from Syracuse, he is now McNeese's starting point guard and a really good player for them. They also had the player of the year in that conference, a UMass transfer named Javon Garcia. And they had the defensive player of the year in that league, a fifth-year senior named Christian Shoemate. So they're not going to be afraid of Clemson. I can promise you that. And, of course, lingering in the background is all the coaching search stuff, which is just phenomenal drama lingering behind what I think is going to be a good basketball game.
What's interesting about this, guys, I think that the contrast in styles, not on the court, but off the court, in the case of the coaches, will actually show up during the game, right? Ken Brad and his stoic behavior and the way he goes about coaching his team. And Mike, you mentioned this in the intro, Clemson hasn't been their best like they have been in January and a little bit of February, but it is there. Can that steadiness right the ship for them? Because they're going to face a coach who lets it all out, and the team lets it all out. There's virality in everything that we do nowadays. You can't hide anything. And if you bring the cameras into the locker room, and even if you bring the cameras out when you come out of the locker room, it kind of tells a little bit of a story about how you're coaching the team. And in the case of Will Wade, that story is out there. They have swagger, they have bravado, they play strong, they play physical, they play fast, they try to force turnovers. They have 7 guys averaging between 7 and 13 points. They're here for a reason. And as David talked about, they went out and challenged themselves a little bit with Mississippi State and Alabama. But regardless of those results, all those kind of go out the window, and how Will kind of treats this. Now, keep in mind, too, every kid on McNeese's team knows that Will not be coaching there next year. So there's not like this, ooh, is he going to be here? Like, well, it's all out there. And I can guarantee you with almost 100% certainty that he's using that as an advantage point for, hey, guys, this is going to be our last time together. Well, and he'll actually say this: I don't know if any of you are coming with me to wherever I'm going, but that doesn't matter because we're here now. I can almost see that it's already scripted. I'm not saying that I'm advising Will Wade on what to do, but you can feel that's going to happen. The first 4 to 6 minutes of this game will tell the entire story. Now, if we're sharp about it, absolutely take the 7.5 and get it now before it goes down, because there will be a ton of action on McNeese taking 7.5. Maybe to the point where they'll look back on those Mississippi State and Alabama games and say, well, they were close, and now you have the value prop and the boast of the tournament. But I'm telling you right now, I as someone who's been on that side and kind of know how those effects kind of go out the window. Now, the flip side of it is Brad could almost say the same thing, although that's not really his demeanor and his MO, because he has those 4 seniors that presumably may be moving on. If any of them have a chance to come back, who knows? Obviously, in the case of Chase Hunter, it won't happen. But those 2 things will have just as much an effect on how this game gets played out than maybe any other game in the tournament, because Will Wade's going to have a choice of where he wants to go based on what's open, and the fact that this game may actually affect where he ends up, because Brad may end up going to a place that may end up in a place for Will to go to. Like everyone's going to chalk up Will to go to NC State because that's the soup du jour. But not a lot of people knew before and know now that Will went to Clemson. Now all of a sudden it's going to be talked about ad nauseum during the game. He went to Clemson. Brad may be going to Indiana because the Indiana job's not filled. But guys, I will know more, and the untrained eye may be able to, and I can't wait to watch this game to see how the McNeese players come out and how loose and freewheeling they are is exactly the identity of the coach. To see how stable the Clemson players are is exactly the identity of Brad Brownell. They say that styles make fights. These styles couldn't be any more contrasting to me. This is going to be one of maybe the second best game of the first weekend outside of that Louisville Creighton game. They just so happen to be ACC games that we're going to be familiar with. I'm going to be fascinated to watch it. And if I were betting, I would be hammering McNeese plus 7.5. If Clemson wins, going to be close. It could be something that they find themselves on the wrong end of. High potential. Let's not forget, 5-12 is a bad place to be historically for upsets, and that's exactly where we find ourselves in this first game.
Real quick on this one, Mike. Two Clemson advantages are height, 7-footer Locken, 6'10", Ian Shefflin. In the Southland Conference, you just don't run into many dudes like that. Certainly not many duos like that. Another key, McNeese is really, really, really good at creating turnovers. Because Clemson essentially has two handlers on the court in Jaden Zachary and Chase Hunter, it is going to be hard for McNeese to duplicate its favorite thing to do. Against Southland opponents, you can probably create a bunch of turnovers, get a bunch of easy buckets, and there's your margin of victory. I don't think that's going to be their path against Clemson. And then when it comes to the coaching stuff, and I don't know if we're getting into the details later in today's show, but keep in mind, if you're an NC State fan hoping for Will Wade or somebody else, Will Wade, there's a chance Rick Barnes retires at Tennessee, okay? There's a chance, even though Texas got to the NCAA tournament, that there's a coaching change there. There's a chance Brad Brownell takes the Indiana job. So whereas a lot of fans think in terms of two-dimensional chess, okay, do we want Will Wade and would he come here, right? 2 dimensions. This is 4-dimensional stuff where there are agents and advisors out there who know the answers to questions that we may not know, and even if we did know, we might not be able to share because of confidences. Is it really the year Rick Barnes retires at Tennessee? It might be. Does Texas, high-profile school with a huge budget, have a vacancy? Does Will Wade's alma mater end up with a vacancy? The timing on all these things could really throw out of whack various schools' coaching searches. Because if Will Wade's mentality is to wait and see about these other dominoes falling, that could take a while. And if you were the number one target at an NC State or somewhere else, well, NC State's either got to decide we're not waiting for you, or we're willing to wait. But what if Will Wade likes the Clemson job or the Tennessee job better, and those two schools go on a little run? Are you going to put your coaching search back a week, 2 weeks, as the transfer portal opens on March 24th? Like, we're in 4-dimensional chess right here, guys, and that makes it fascinating even beyond, obviously, the ball games that Coach outlined as 2 of the best in the round of 64.
Another guy who might be into that coaching carousel right now is Takeo Sittle at UNC Wilmington, and they are one of 2 non-ACC teams out of the state of North Carolina who will be playing in this year's NCAA tournament. The Seahawks are the number 14 seed as the champions of the CAA, and they will be playing against number 3 seed Texas Tech at the Intrust Bank Arena in Wichita, Kansas. Now, nothing says excitement in terms of the travel log than Wichita, Kansas. So everybody will be focused on basketball when the Seahawks and the Red Raiders do battle. It'll be a 10-10 tip on True TV on Thursday night. Carrie, David, this is another one of those games that everybody's going to probably pick Texas Tech, but Takeo Sittle and the Seahawks are playing pretty good basketball right now, and they're the type of team that doesn't shy away from the spotlight. They seem to go to big places like Kentucky and win on the reg, so this one could be one of those upset specials in your bracket.
Texas Tech will be a trendy pick to make the Final Four. They're very well coached and actually had a great year, and their statistics and their metrics match up to that. And I kind of liken them to, my alma mater the year they made the Final Four, or we made, or I'm sorry, when you're a 3 seed, it seems to be historically the first game of the tournament is always your toughest one. If you're that type of team that has that chance, it's not that you almost play better against better teams, but you almost have to overcome the "we have nothing to lose" mentality that Takeo is going to take with UNC Wilmington. Now, regionally, it doesn't really work out to have that type of in-house support. You will get the underdog support from the fans, regardless, as always happens in the first round. But I think granted, Texas Tech's done a great job and really established that team as a team you really don't want to see right now. I think they, defensively, obviously, are going to be better than they are offensively. But this year, their offense was actually better than their defense. That's a game that, if you're a UNC Wilmington fan, you're happy to make it. I really don't love the matchup for them because I think Texas Tech is one of those 8 teams that actually statistically should be in the Final Four if they do take care of business. But I expect a close game from Takeo and the Seahawks, given the fact that they have the nothing to lose mentality going in.
I hated this matchup for UNCW. As someone who has been a professor at UNCW and has gotten to know Coach Siddle a little bit, I knew they were likely to end up on the 14 line seed-wise. So I was looking at the probable 3 seeds and thinking I would rather the Seahawks play Iowa State. I would rather the Seahawks play Wisconsin of the Big Ten. I would even rather the Seahawks play the Kentucky Wildcats, another 3 seed. Remember, the Seahawks famously went to Lexington and beat the Wildcats on their home court just last year. This is the worst of the 3 seeds that the Seahawks could have ended up with, in part because the Red Raiders have, I'd say, 2 probable NBA draft picks. The Conference Player of the Year in the Big 12, which is a really good league, was a sophomore forward named J.T. Toppin. He might not be a first-round pick if he comes out this year, but he's going to be a pick. 6'9", 225 pounds, 18 points a game, 9 rebounds a game. He's going to be an All-American. That is a brutally tough matchup for Takeo Siddle and the Seahawks. They do have a couple of big guys at UNCW. Harlan Obayoha is a 7-footer. Kamari McGriff is a 6'9" guy. So it's not like they're going to be automatically overwhelmed, but that's a heck of a talent you have to deal with. Meanwhile, they have a 6'6" wing named Darion Williams at Texas Tech, who's their number 2 scorer, 14 points a game, 37% from three-point land. He's probably going to be a second-round draft pick if he comes out this year as a junior. The fun part of this matchup, and it's entertaining for different reasons than some of the others that we outlined earlier, the best offensive team in the country this year. I agree with what Coach Keating said. I often think of Texas Tech as defense first. This year, the Red Raiders are the best offensive team in the Big 12, and we saw the Seahawks absolutely the best offensive team in the Coastal Athletic Association. They're actually both comfortable speeding it up at times, but playing at a slower tempo at times. So it's not a one-dimensional high-efficiency offense in either case. So that part of it should be fun, but I do understand why UNCW is a double-digit underdog. Texas Tech was second in the Big 12 only to the Houston Cougars, who in my opinion are up there next to Duke as the most likely team to win the national championship this year. Houston is loaded and well-coached under Kelvin Sampson. Texas Tech finishing number 2 in that league is a heck of an accomplishment. Texas Tech also has, in addition to, I mentioned Toppin inside, they also have a bunch of really good three-point shooters. Texas Tech shoots 38% as a team from beyond the arc. That's a really good number. And here's a blast from the past for you, Mike Waddell. Kerwin Walton, former Tar Heel,
Wow,
is in his 3rd year with the Red Raiders. He, as he was with Carolina, I mean, he's been a good three-point shooter dating back to his high school days. He's shooting 40% for the Red Raiders from beyond the arc, but he's not the only one. UNCW's only game against the Big 12 opponent this season was that trip to Kansas. They lost 84-66. For those who haven't seen the Seahawks, just let me give some quick love. Their best player is their point guard, Donovan Newby. Second team All-CAA, CAA tournament MVP. They also have a great three-point shooter in Nolan Hodge, another good wing player in Bo Montgomery, and then the 2 big guys that I mentioned earlier. Last thing for anyone wondering, and I'm not sure these numbers apply anymore because the world has changed so much, but anyone wondering historically how often a 14 seed beats a 3 seed, with of course the Seahawks being the 14 this year against the 3-seeded Red Raiders, it's about a 15% winning percentage for the 14 seed. I get why it's that low, and man, I wish we had a chance to see the Seahawks against any other 3 seed. This one is going to be an even tougher mountain to climb.
The 12:40 game on Thursday in Providence has another team from the bold North State, the High Point Panthers, as the number 13 seed against the Big Ten's Purdue Boilermakers as the 4 seed. That a 12:40 game on True TV. Kerry Keating, Purdue comes out of the Big Ten. They're a pretty good ball club. Do you think High Point has what it takes to maybe pull an upset in this 4-13 matchup?
Well, offensively, the statistics will say that they do. And anytime you pull a team on a draw that's won 14 games in a row, you got to be a little bit weary if you're Matt Painter and the Boilermakers. And it's not like they finished up their season on a strong note. They did play at the top of a very difficult conference in the Big Ten, and obviously have some very dynamic players. In the case of Braden Smith, the best point guard in the entire country. They're going to have that offense on full display. You know, Purdue has traditionally been a physical team, a physical defensive team. I'll say this about Purdue. They like to double team in areas to put you at a disadvantage. They're not great defensively. That is one thing that I do know about Purdue is, you know, when you break their team down, if there is a flaw about Purdue that hasn't traditionally been the case about what you know about Boilermaker teams, is that defensively, they're not as strong as they've been. They don't have a real rim protector. They have youth up front. They consistently get into foul trouble. You know, they struggle to defend on the perimeter. They find themselves having to create different defensive mindsets in different games. And in the case of High Point, it'll be literally, can their offense establish that it's better than Purdue's defense? There'll be a little bit of, as David likes to say, a chess match happening here. How does High Point establish their offense? What adjustments do they force Purdue in? Because that is one thing that Matt is tremendous at, a very underrated coach about. Even though that they do have some defensive prowess historically, and that's part of Matt's MO, one thing that he tries to do is make quick adjustments during that game. And I think in tournament games, it's kind of been feast or famine. We saw them lose as, I think, a 1 or a 2 seed recently. They've had some monumental upsets, and it's not because necessarily their team wasn't good enough. It's because the matchup presented that they couldn't make the defensive adjustments quick enough. I think in the case of High Point, a really good offensive team, albeit maybe not against the strongest of competition, but when you're winning, you're winning. You can't replace that. And as I mentioned, coming in on a 13-14 game win streak, winning your conference, taking care of business, and the first time ever. You know, we talked about all the outside ancillary details that can kind of affect these games in the case of the other ACC matches we talked about. This is something also. There's going to be a lot of hype, a lot of excitement. The first time ever for High Point to be in the tournament, you know, go out and represent the right way. This is a very dangerous team from an offensive standpoint. It'll really come down to if they force Purdue to make any defensive adjustments early in the game.
Yeah, Mike, you know the classic line from the movie Dumb and Dumber is, "So you're saying there's a chance." Here's a great fun fact for any High Point fans hoping for an upset here. Not only does High Point have that 14-game winning streak Coach just mentioned, which, by the way, is the second longest of anyone in the 68-team field, Purdue has lost 6 of its last 9 games. They are not playing their best basketball lately, so that should provide at least some hope. The other one, Dumb and Dumber style, is that High Point's greatest strength is a perfect match for Purdue's greatest weakness. And what I mean is, if we looked at all the mid-majors and low majors in the entire country, one of the most efficient offenses, again, outside the power conferences, is the High Point Panthers. Alan Huss, the second-year head coach at High Point, and shout out to him because that school's been in Division I for a little bit more than a quarter century now, and this is that maiden voyage in the NCAA tournament. He won the regular season in the Big South last year and this year. They had a devastating loss in the conference tournament a year ago. Otherwise, that would have been their first trip to the big dance. But Alan Huss is an offensive mastermind, formerly of the Creighton Blue Jays, as a player and as a coach. And they have some similarities in how they play. And he has shared with us on the David Glenn Show how his recruits have to meet certain offensive analytics in addition to some, unselfishness and other, personality traits. and the pieces are fitting nicely. Another thing to remind fans of about this one is that in this new world of the transfer portal and immediate eligibility, the starting point guard at High Point, Keza Jiffa, former JUCO star. The starting guard, Damarian Williams, really good player, formerly of Texas Tech. The best forward, maybe their best player at times, Kamani Hamilton, formerly of Mississippi State. Okay, so like this is talent that has sort of drizzled down from the high majors to be a part of this brilliantly put together mid-major team. And High Point has something very few mid-majors have as well, a 7-footer that can actually play. You might see 7-footers on those rosters, but they're usually bit players, small role players. Jocelyn Bodo is 7 feet tall and 255 pounds, the High Point starting center. He was the Big South Defensive Player of the Year. And oh, by the way, one more guy, Bobby Petterford, their backup point guard at High Point, is formerly of Kansas and East Carolina. I mean, if you're good enough to sign with Kansas out of high school, as with some of these other guys playing in, the Big 12 or otherwise, SEC, this is not your typical mid-major team of yesteryear. It is being built that way more commonly now. But Purdue without Zach Edey, remember that's the 7'4" guy now in the NBA, they're not great defensively. The problem for High Point is Braden Smith, the Purdue point guard, is the Big Ten Player of the Year and might be a first-team All-American. Really good player last year on their Final Four team, even better player this year. And their other all Big Ten first-team guy is Trey Kaufman-Renn, 20-point-per-game guy. Without Edey, they're just brilliant offensively, and Matt Painter obviously is a very respected coach who took them to the title game just 1 year ago. Last fact on this, the best teams that High Point beat this year were North Texas and UAB, neither of which was good enough to make the NCAA tournament. So this is a massive jump in weight class that the Panthers are attempting as they take on Purdue. But those are some of the fun facts. Purdue's been sliding, High Point's been thriving, and Purdue's defense is going to have to try to contain the best offensive team in the Big South and one of the best offensive teams in the entire mid-major ranks.
So, guys, we've talked about Carolina, Louisville, Clemson, High Point, UNC Wilmington. The only team we haven't talked about, the Duke Blue Devils. They, of course, will get the winner of the Mount St. Mary's American game at 2:40 in Raleigh on Friday afternoon. Cooper Flagg gets a little bit of extra time to get that ankle ready to go. We don't know about the status of Malik Brown. He is probably less likely to return anytime soon. Guys, not much of a first round challenge expected right here for the Duke Blue Devils. How much do you play, Kerry Keating, a Cooper Flagg, knowing that you don't need him to win these early games? He might be available, but does that mean necessarily that he's going to be out there playing 20, 25 minutes a game?
Yeah, I don't think you'll see that in game one. The whole thing will be determined on exactly where his health is at. If he's 100% fully cleared, you let him play. You can't play to avoid injuries. You never do that. That's how actually injuries happen. In the case of Duke, they certainly can survive without Cooper in the first round. The second round, obviously, in that 8-9 matchup, whoever comes out of Mississippi State Baylor, a little bit more dicey. You want to have all hands on deck. I think when you look at this in the totality of what could happen and how long he may be out, and we'll know that after the first round comes up, and certainly the question will be asked all the time of John Shire and his training staff. When you look at Duke's bracket, and you start to get teams that you kind of have a feel for in the tournament that could be, upsets of the number one seeds, I kind of like Duke's road if I'm Duke, even without Cooper Flagg. They showed that prowess, as we talked about, to have the depth on display in the form of Con Knippel and Tyrese Proctor, Isaiah Evans, and et al. Duke's got a pretty favorable draw, I think. And I think to the point where even if you didn't have Cooper Flagg, if he really wasn't ready to go full strength, if you only had him for, say, 5-10 minutes, or let's go and see how it feels and then let him determine that. Because there's other factors involved in this too. It's just something that you really don't have year to year. Like, he's thinking about a future that's going to garner him hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, That's on the table, the way that this thing is structured right now, where he's headed as the presumptive number one pick. Now, we're living in the present now, and he's still obviously a Duke Blue Devil, but I think that kind of factors in a little bit in terms of decision making. Will he sacrifice one for the other? Doesn't seem to me to be that type of player, be that type of kid. It seems to me like he'd want to be out there and play. He likes to play, right? He likes the competition aspect of it, wants to be a part of it. I don't think you'll see him in the first round, even if he's ready to play. I think because you need to give maybe a couple extra days to heal on this, and time is the only thing that really heals a sprained ankle. Obviously, to rest, relax, to get your flexion back, to get your strength back. There's really no need to have him out there playing at all. Even if it's just for 5 minutes, it far outweighs the benefit of the rest. I do think that you'll see him in the second round game, depending on whoever comes through and who they play, Mississippi State or Baylor. I think that's the time you'll see Cooper Flagg back out there, a tip for the starting lineup.
I wonder, Mike, if the Duke mentality is going to be let him break a sweat against either American or Mount St. Mary's, because I don't want his first game in, what would that be, about 10 or more than a week, to be against a team that's capable of beating Duke in round two. Like, I believe Duke, as Coach said, is the easiest team for me to pencil into the Elite Eight. For example, if you're a number one seed Houston, there's a possibility you have to deal with Mark Few and Gonzaga in the round of 32. Now, I would still take Houston, but that's a dangerous round of 32 game if you're the Houston Cougars, who I think are one of the best teams in the country. If you're number one seed Florida, your possible round of 32 matchup is Danny Hurley and the UConn Huskies. That's not fun or easy to see, right? Even if you think Florida's the better team than UConn right now, that's a challenging second-round matchup. Auburn would face either a Louisville or a Creighton. I believe the Blue Devils have the least complicated path to the Elite Eight. It could get, it almost always gets difficult at that point. But just a fun fact, after the Blue Devils inevitably beat either American or Mount St. Mary's on Friday in Raleigh, the second-round opponent will include familiar faces. Remember that Jeremy Roach, veteran guard for the Blue Devils, is a starter for the Baylor Bears. And former Miami Hurricane star Norchad Omier is the best player on Baylor this year. So those are 2 out of the 5 starters that are former ACC guys at Baylor. Meanwhile, Mississippi State has 2 starters that are former ACC guys. Claudell Harris, Boston College, Michael Nwoko, their big guy formerly of the Miami Hurricanes as well. So there'll be some familiarity in the round of 32. I personally don't believe that either the Mississippi State defense or the Baylor defense is capable of slowing down the Duke offense when it's running on all cylinders, assumedly including a healthy Cooper Flagg. But if I were listening to Cooper, I'd get Jon Scheyer's point about I don't let a young man play just because he tells me he's okay, because he's such a competitive guy. He might be, exaggerating the truth or whatever. But if Cooper says he's okay and the medical team says he's okay, I'd rather he break a sweat and reconnect with his teammates and rebuild that timing against a 16 seed that you're going to beat prior to that matchup on Sunday in the round of 32 against Baylor or Mississippi State, who I don't think will beat Duke, but certainly are capable. Those 8 and 9 seeds are infinitely more dangerous than what these high seeds face in the first round, and that might play into Jon Scheyer's thinking leading up to that opener. The original Saltworks has become a legendary breakfast, brunch, and lunch place in Wilmington for both locals and out-of-town visitors over the last 50-plus years. Our good friend Bob Hubbard owns the place, but he's also the one cooking your food and often roaming the dining room to greet you with a smile and to make sure your visit is a great one. Bob has been running the show at this unique roadside diner for more than 20 years now, and he and his friendly, hardworking staff aim to treat you like one of their own. Try Bob's homemade omelets or special recipe grits for breakfast or his legendary cheeseburgers for lunch. The original Saltworks, your breakfast and lunch choice on Oleander Drive in Wilmington.
This time of season, ADs, head coaches, man, they are going 100 miles an hour, maybe like you in your business. It's tax season. You got a lot of stuff coming up as the first quarter comes to an end. You need to get organized. You need to call Emily Parks at Organized for Success. They are bringing us our next segment here on Timeout, and we're talking about coaching searches. And I know as a former AD that coaching searches can start one place and then end up at a very different one. We've talked about some of those things, guys, so far here in today's show. And as you look at NC State, lots of rumors going around the Atlantic Coast Conference tournament this past week in Charlotte. Are the Wolfpack going to get this guy or that guy? My source says this. My money guy says this. I mean, what does anybody really know? Well, not that much, because the only people that are really talking right now are media people talking to each other and then quoting each other saying that they have a source. Or one of my favorites is when the agents or the coaches themselves are out there spreading information around because they want something to happen that maybe 1, 2, 3 degrees of separation away could end up to be a positive for them personally or for their program in terms of getting somebody out of the way that they don't like to compete against. But for NC State, hey, this is going into week number 2 for Boo Corrigan, looking for the new head coach of the Wolfpack. They were rumored to have talked to Will Wade not only one time, but a second time over the weekend. What are you guys hearing about the openings at both NC State and Virginia? And then what are some other things that could shake open if somebody were to depart the ACC and go to another job?
Well, I think you'll have some dominoes fall in unexpected places by way of coaches leaving that we don't expect to. There are so many things that are affecting coaching jobs now that are a precursor of what's to come. There's complete dynamic change in how the highest level of college basketball, when I say highest level, teams that can make the tournament in their own respective grouping. There's ways that are going to change that. Are you going to be affiliated with a conference or not? I saw one suggestion that I tend to agree with, that at the one bid leagues, there's really no benefit to be in a one bid league anymore. There's almost, to me, a way that you can make yourself independent, because the other thing that I've found out in talking to a lot of coaches nowadays, they don't know what to do with their schedule yet. They haven't figured out how to necessarily manage their schedule, largely in part because the transfer portal is changing all of the rosters that in the past, Mike and David, you would kind of have a little bit of a gauge and a handle on. And look, I was privy to be around a guy who was a master at managing schedules based on what was to come at Kansas and my dad. And when he did those schedules for Kansas, and all of a sudden Kansas was a top 2 or 3 seed, like, well, yeah, they're pretty good, but then it was their strength of schedule. That's what the committee based it on. And I say that because you were able to at least get a feel by talking to people of what was to come. Hey, we finished second or third, but we had 2, 3 kids sitting out. We got a couple red shirts. We're going to be really good next year. We're going to win the MEAC. We're going to win the MAC. We're going to win the Big West. Well, we know at Kansas and a school like that, we can beat them, especially we'll give them a little bit of money. They need that money. That game is all changed right now. In the case of coaching searches, I think you really kind of show your colors. Like, look, Miami hired a coach off a sitting staff in the middle of a season before their conference tournament, and Jay Lucas leaving Duke, albeit for a fellow conference member in Duke, to come because the priority for Miami was, we do have resources to go into the portal right now. And if Jay is the guy and puts the right staff and office together, we can win next year. So that's the priority. I think in the case of guys like Boo Corrigan, is that their priority or not? Or do they have the patience to do something for the medium term that could turn into long term? I think if you're really calculated as a coach right now, and let's just use Will Wade as an example, because for obvious reasons, if you are the guy that can coach at multiple places because of your acumen and your history and your ability, you really want to make sure you go to the place that it matches what you want to do. Like I said, you're going to have some tournament coaches, at least one tournament coach, leave his school completely unexpectedly to go to another place because he believes that it's better suited for him, for whatever the term of his lifespan is, to have success there. And he's leaving a tournament school because this is all going to be about what resources do we have? Number one, where is the allocation of the salary going to fall to basketball? The going rate out there amongst the coaching circles is that at the highest levels, it has to be at least close to 7 million a year. And this is crazy. We've been talking about this. So coaches will use that as a barometer. Number two, are you going to staff me with players? I'm sorry, with people a la what Rick Pitino has. Rick Pitino has a former assistant coach who made his bones as a recruiter, who is now his general manager. He lets him get in the weeds of the portal. He knows right now they have to replace 3 guys. He doesn't even care who those guys are. That's on that guy to do it with the trust and the input from Coach Pitino, and he'll just coach the team. So my point is, are you set up to where I can just go coach the team? Or do I have to really be involved in making these financial decisions? Some coaches may not want that. These are the things that are going to drive these decisions as to how quickly and how patient ADs like Blue Corrigan need to be. And you mentioned this too earlier on, Mike. Is this the case where we have to get somebody, or we have to make sure we get someone to get it right? That's always kind of the case anyway, but I think there's no more pressure to do that in the past than there is now. The difference now is the ramifications of that could be we can win and make the tournament next year and then really set this thing up, or we can figure out, given our landscape of where we're at, how we can set this up to get the right guy in to win year in and year out, knowing we can make those yearly adjustments, because we're going to give this head coach the right guy to help manage this thing off the floor and let him go out and coach. 2 totally different dynamics that haven't necessarily been a driving force in hiring before, that I think today will be a true tale of exactly where the AD and the campus and the administration's heads are at based on how fast and who they hire.
Yeah, Mike, this is going to be a fascinating coaching carousel for even more than the usual reasons. Number one, imagine if you're Villanova right now and you are talking to Ryan Odom of VCU, Richard Pitino of New Mexico, and Chris Collins of Northwestern, the former Duke player and longtime Wildcats head coach. If Chris Collins was your number one choice, you could hire him right now. Northwestern is not in the NCAA tournament. Chris Collins has clearly shown interest in the job. Northwestern, by Big Ten standards, does not give its basketball coach the same kind of resources as Coach was describing, NIL and otherwise, than much of the rest of that league. Villanova being a Big East member, football is not playing at the FBS level at Villanova. There's an attractiveness in the eyes of many coaches that a Villanova, of course, with basketball as the number one sport on campus, will give its coach more resources, both revenue sharing internally and the third-party name, image, likeness money, which again is going to continue even under the new rules. If Chris Collins was the number one guy at Villanova, they could hire him tomorrow. If they really prefer Ryan Odom of VCU or Richard Pitino of New Mexico or somebody else who's still coaching in the NCAA tournament, it can't happen now. Jay Lucas was willing to leave Duke early, and even that was unconventional because he's not the head coach, and because these coaches, most of them, have come to the consensus that if you wait all the way until your team is eliminated, it may be too late to build your roster for next year with the transfer portal officially opening again on Monday, March 24th. You could lose an entire year, is the quote that I have heard repeatedly. Same thing at NC State, right? Will Wade is coaching right now at McNeese in the NCAA tournament. He's not available for the more detailed conversations until his team is eliminated. Maybe that's in the round of 64, maybe not. Justin Gainey, if he was the number one choice, Rick Barnes at Tennessee probably would let him leave early, even though they're in the NCAA tournament, but maybe Justin Gainey is the second choice or the third choice. Richard Pitino, again, has talked to the Wolfpack, as have Justin Gainey and Will Wade, but Richard Pitino in the NCAA tournament, New Mexico head coach. How long does his team play? That impacts how quickly things can ramp up after that. And again, the 4D chess about this also includes, does Rick Barnes retire at Tennessee? So that's a prominent vacancy. Does Texas make a coaching change, even though the Longhorns barely made the NCAA tournament? That would be a prominent vacancy. And those schools could be after some of the same people that these schools are after in our neighborhood. Does Brad Brownell leave Clemson for Indiana? UVA's talked to Ryan Odom and would like to hire him, but he might go to Villanova instead. UVA's talking to Richard Pitino. Ben McCollum of Drake has his team in the NCAA tournament. Fran McCaffrey, a guy we know in this state because of his time at UNC Greensboro, is out at Iowa. Would Ben McCullum at nearby Drake be the right fit for Iowa instead of a UVA closer to our backyard? Bob Ritchie at Furman has been on the UVA list. His team's playing in the NIT. Is that different? Can you talk to an NIT coach, or is he also going to ask you to wait a little bit longer? There's a lot of moving parts in all this stuff. And to Coach Keating's point, I was always told back in the day, and this is just new variations of it, but what do coaches ask themselves? Number one, what are you going to pay me? If that's not an acceptable number, I don't even want to get to the other things on my checklist. So I do know what you're going to pay me, not just the salary number, but bonuses and all the rest, buyouts, length of contract. What's my contract? That's number one. Unless a school throws out some appealing pictures, you don't get to number 2, 3, and 4. What's 2, 3, and 4? The number 2 question I've often heard is, can I win there? Now, can I win there for a long time was, what is your budget for men's basketball compared to the other teams in your league especially? Do you have an outdated facility where you play your home games, or is it a state-of-the-art facility or something in between? What about your weight room? What about the other facilities? How new are they? Is money being raised? Can I win there takes a lot of different forms, but a new form of can I win there is, what is your NIL budget? How much of the $20.5 million that you're allowed to spend on this new House settlement NCAA lawsuit is going to be dedicated to men's basketball versus football or something else on campus? What does the picture look like for that third-party NIL money, right? I've been told that the overwhelming majority of schools in the Power 5 basketball conferences are going to spend to the 20-point-something million cap. That's the internal revenue sharing, right? It's just $20.5 million flowing to your choice of athletes on campus, but it can be divided any number of ways. There's a handful of schools in the power leagues, including the ACC, that are not sure they'll spend all the way to the $20.5 million cap because they're just not sure they have the resources. Is NC State one of those schools, or are there boosters at NC State stepping up and saying, we're going to make sure that the Wolfpack can spend all the way to 20 plus million, the way most of their competitors, almost all of their competitors in the ACC are going to spend? That's a lot of variables, man. It's what's my contract? Can I win there, including NIL stuff? You know, what's the culture there? You'd be surprised how often a coach's wife vetoes a certain school or a certain part of the country. That stuff does happen, not a lot, but from time to time. I also know coaches that would never, ever, ever go to school X. I won't get into the details, but for example, a black head coach who believes that a certain fan base has too many racists, and they just would not go to that school. I've heard that straight from those coaches' mouths. They would never go to schools A, B, and C because of that factor, because of things they've witnessed with their own eyes. So there's a lot of factors in play. It always starts with money and can I win there? But man, there's a lot of moving parts. And for restless fans who are wondering why this stuff takes so long, these are among the reasons why it takes so long. And just remember, as of a week from us having this conversation, there are only 16 coaches still in the NCAA tournament. And it's also the day that the portal officially opens. You want to talk about the wild, wild west, man. It is going to be crazy 1 week from today because there'll be only 16 head coaches in the NCAA tournament, handful more in some other lesser tournaments, and then a whole, literally thousands of names entered into the Division I men's basketball transfer portal. That is when you're going to see a lot of these most prominent coaching vacancies filled. Just remember that there are some that aren't officially open yet that are likely to become open and maybe be higher in the pecking order than your favorite school.
You talk about the spending to that House settlement, the revenue share cap, 20 point whatever million dollars. And you start to look at some of the choices that are going to be made by athletic directors and people who are running these campuses. And we're not talking about a coaching change at Wake Forest, despite the fact that the Demon Deacons have not made the NCAA tournament in 5 years. But if you're John Curry, you've had to replace Dave Clawson, who routinely complained about the lack of football NIL support at Wake Forest. You've replaced him now with Jake Dickert, who got a lot out of a little out in the old Pac-12. and now he's the head coach of Demon Deacon football. But again, at Wake Forest, they've not been to the NCAA tournament in 5 years. Since Skip Prosser passed away and Dino had a few good years, Wake Forest basketball has been largely irrelevant. It makes me wonder, why would anybody at Wake Forest in a position of influence advocate to spend the lion's share of that 20-some million dollars on football when the likelihood of that ever paying off is about like buying the $2 play of Powerball down at your local Circle K? Okay. Whereas if you put 10 to 12 million dollars into basketball, which they're likely to put into Demon Deacon football, Steve Forbes could go out and buy a great roster. I mean, even Cal in Fayetteville, Arkansas with the Hogs is only spending around 8 million this year. And granted, those are going to go up and up and up. But man, some of the choices that these schools have, that have both a football and a basketball program at that power level. I mean, outside of Alabama, who's the top 4 seed in a CFP, achiever? Well, Clemson this year, they made the CFP as they won the ACC football championship, and they're, one of the top 4 seeds in the tournament. But wow, I mean, you got to figure if you're Brad Brownell, don't you want to go somewhere to where you're going to have the lion's share of that money, perhaps? I think there are a lot of questions out there, and there's some great decisions that are going to be debated that these ADs make. And a lot of people don't talk about this kind of stuff, but it's fascinating that you would, at some of these schools where you're not going to contend for a CFP championship, that you're going to burn over $10 million a year just because you can. I don't know, guys. That just sticks in my craw, and I can't get it out of my head.
Look at it this way. You have spent most of your adult life in athletics administration. You've been a Division I athletic director. You've been an assistant AD in multiple major conferences. And really, it has never been one of your top priorities to make these sorts of decisions. For most of the past 25 years, your job was to raise money. It was to hire the right coaches, fire the wrong coaches, connect with the fan base, help facilities improve. Now you have a brand new part of your job description. Mm-hmm. And you, as the athletic director, have a football coach coming in many schools saying, I want 18 of the 20.5 million as the football coach, because we are the tail that wags the dog in terms of football TV money, which is an accurate statement. Roughly 80% of all TV money is football related. So the football coach says the opposite of what you said. It may be different at Wake Forest, and I respect that argument. But the football coach is saying, I want 18 million, and you can divvy up the 2.5 million to whoever else you see fit. What's happening is at some schools, it's a little bit closer to 15 million for football and 5 million for men's basketball, and then just a little for everybody else combined. But what's also happening is coaches are being asked. You talk about the changing job description of an AD like Mike Waddell. There's a changing job description for a head coach like Kerry Keating, where for his entire career, I'm sure relating to boosters was a factor. Now, relating to boosters means find some dudes with deep pockets who will supplement the money we have coming from revenue sharing. That's just that revenue sharing is name, image, likeness money coming from within the university. That's all it is. And again, you have the discretion as an athletic department with the AD having a huge decision. You are going to make mad many of your coaches with your answer to that question, period. And the ones that aren't mad are going to be disappointed, right? So if at Coach Keating's school, he is told, I mean, Santa Clara would have been different because football is a different animal there. But if he was at a football school at the time, maybe he's told by his AD that, you know what, we'll give you 4 million, but we need you to cultivate third party outside the athletic department business owner boosters to maybe raise another 3 million for you. And now you have 4 million from us internally, 3 million that it is you're no longer just a recruiter and shaking hands and kissing babies and finding the right fits for your system and hiring a good staff and recruiting. You are now essentially more directly than ever before a fundraiser. And if you don't like the 3 or 4 million I'm giving you from inside the university, you better go find your own 3 or 4 million from your bigger booster buddies. And that is happening. Brad Brownell at Clemson has developed a reputation for being the kind of guy that has gotten, obviously, football is the centerpiece at Clemson, duh. But Brad Brownell has developed a reputation as someone who has cultivated deep-pocketed people specifically willing to support Clemson basketball. That's how you keep Chase Hunter and Ian Shefflin rather than them playing for somebody else. And that's how you attract 3-year Boston College starter Jaden Zachary and multi-year Cincinnati starter Victor Larkin. They're your 4 foundational pieces. And if you didn't have the right money people, maybe none of those 4 would be playing for Clemson basketball this year. I mean, ask Boston College and Virginia Tech, who lost most of their entire lineup from last year's teams. They're now playing elsewhere over name, image, likeness issues. If you fail to support Mike Young at Virginia Tech, and now they're saying they're going to give him more money, well, duh, no coach is good enough to lose 4/5 of his starting lineup every year because other schools are paying better. No, I mean, nobody's replenishing the talent that quickly every year. You got to give him some help so that his coaching acumen matters more. It doesn't matter as much if you don't have the horses. And these are the fascinating decisions that, the House lawsuit is brand spanking new, guys. It actually isn't even in effect yet, technically. But these decisions, we sometimes say something is being done for the first time. The $20.5 million division has never been a part in the 100-year history of college athletics. It starts this summer, and ADs and coaches are dividing on how to slice that pie, and it dramatically impacts the coaching carousel that we've been discussing today.
I just, in listening and trying to revert back to how I came up in this business, but where it's going, and we're kind of throwing around, 20 million for this and 7 million for that's a lot of money. Like, we're not talking about chump change here. Like, I got to Santa Clara in 2007, and our entire budget to run the basketball program was $300,000.
Wow.
Gonzaga's at the time was 1.2 million. I was more worried about that chasm than anything else. And that wasn't that long ago, not even 20 years ago. And here we are talking about any team that wants to compete in Division I, at least at $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, to pay the players, not even operate and run their team. And Mike, you know this better than anybody in terms of operating budgets and the costs involved to do this, and you're trying to do things right. I remember everyone clamoring for practice facilities and chartering flights. Like, guys, there's costs involved in that. This really does all boil down to, and look, for all the flaws and that Rick Pitino has had, he's overcome them by being a great coach. But just look at what's happened there right now. They literally have a billionaire who is openly and outwardly saying, this guy is in the locker room, Mike Rapoli, talking to the team. Like, everybody knows that's the coach, but that's the guy who's paying me. Like, that whole dynamic is just like, when you step back, like, hold on a second here. Like, it's a great time to be a college basketball player right now. It's a great time to be even a budding high school player that's going to find a path to that money before maybe one day getting to the NBA or Europe. But the amount of money they're talking about, this isn't like, hey, I need 20 million to invest in this facility. I need 20 million so that we can invest. There's no investment here. This is all year to year. This is per year. And I just like sometimes like step back, like, wait a minute. We're talking about 5 million, 7 million a year. Like, this is all changing. That is an inordinate amount of money for 75% of all Division I schools right now. All it really tells me is this is eventually going to lead to the haves and the have-nots, which is what they always wanted. The haves always wanted. And the fact that this tournament is kind of still binding everybody together, albeit by the shoestrings, until into the 35-36 season. These next 9 seasons of college basketball, it will look nothing like we're talking about right now, even 5 years, let alone even 4 years from now. But this year-to-year impact and how you can kind of plan out where your budget's going to be, where you're going to get this money from. Are you going to actually have, and guys, this is really what it boils down to for me. It, I think, is a 51 to 49% ratio of who your head coach is and who's managing this for the head coach. Because it's impossible right now for a coach to manage anywhere from an 18 to 28-year-old kid, because they're also kind of kids if they're in college, if you will, to try to win games while getting into the day-to-day operations to make this not be a roller coaster. Well, we had the money last year. Now we don't have it this year. We're going to get it next year. Well, we found this thing. All of a sudden, a new booster comes along. But what happens when that said booster gives up the $4 million that they got in interest payments from their war chest that they have and decide, you know what? I don't like that ROI. We didn't make the tournament. What are the agreements with the boosters or the financiers, if you will? And this is where some of these guys are going to push for private equity and venture, because they're going to take more of that approach to try to create the return and revenue share in the returns on the tournament back to those people. Not sustainable, in my opinion, not a good model as of yet. But all of these moving parts really have such a dynamic effect on the year to year. You're going to see the same teams in, the ones that can manage it, and you're going to have some of these teams that have the foresight to really set this up. And this all goes back to the conversation that we've had all day today, guys. Who are you going to hire? What resources are you going to give? But what support are you going to give to that coach that's going to be so dialed into a business acumen to run this right year to year, so you don't go through these fluctuations that are going to drive not only your coaches crazy, yourself crazy, but your fan base and your alums crazy. There is just so many different moving parts. It's not a great time to be an AD unless you have those monies in hand. It's going to be really interesting to see how these things all get planned out and play out in the next month.
Public service announcement. Public service announcement. If you're a young person, get it in writing. We already have lawsuits, for example, against Florida State head coach Leonard Hamilton, recently retired, of players who said the coach promised them X in the form of name, image, likeness money under the old system and didn't get what they were promised. And I guarantee you Florida State is not the only school that fits that description. Get it in writing. Under the new system, what'll be good is your own university has to put it in writing. Whatever they're promising you, they have to put it in writing. That's a much safer place to go. But those third parties, that billionaire in the St. John's locker room, you better get those deals in writing so that if you're injured, you still get paid. If you underperform, you still get paid. Get it in writing, get some good legal representation, because the money, it's not unusual to see $1 million, a seven-figure college basketball player nowadays. Get it in writing. The other fun thing, I'm dying to see how this plays out. Whereas that St. John's example has become a public one. 9 out of 10 coaches that I know in their public comments will only generally speak about money. They will not get real specific because they don't want to alienate their athletic director. They don't want to alienate this booster or whatever. They got to be careful with how they word it so they speak generally. Jim Boeheim in his final days at Syracuse and Red Autry, his successor at Syracuse, have both come out and publicly said, hey, we have a lot of big boosters and they haven't been stepping up for us. I mean, Boeheim's famous for being blunt in all contexts, but he said at the end, I don't know what's going on. Remember his comments? Wake has bought a basketball team and Miami has bought a basketball team. And we have a lot of great supporters here at Syracuse basketball. But I know this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy, and they're not stepping up to get me players. That's the truth serum answer to what's going on. 99 out of 100 coaches do not speak as bluntly as end of his career already in the Hall of Fame, Jim Boeheim at Syracuse. But you're going to see behind the curtain conversations about boosters who like to talk about the money they used to throw around. But now that it's even more intimately tied to next year's basketball team, you better be a fascinating manager of billionaires and boosters, along with your staff and your recruits and their moms and dads and all the other things that have been part of it for decades.
And David, that's why the old school AD and the old school head coach don't work in this era. There's a reason why Mike Krzyzewski and all of his grandeur and Roy Williams said no mas. There's a reason why my friend Eric Hyman, the former AD at Texas A&M at the University of South Carolina, said on the record 5 years ago, 60 months ago, he said, anyone that wants to be a Division I power level director of athletics has brain damage, okay? because what we grew up working in this business to get to that level of being in the C-suite. I started out as a broadcaster. I then became an administrator and then an AD. And then 3 different times I led professional sports teams. And that's where I got my appreciation of where you put your money in. You need to have immediate impact from that money. It can't be a savings bond anymore. That's what it's always been in college athletics. Well, we have to give a coach 3 years, or there has to be 5 years that we have to give old Ted so he can get everything rolling on the sidelines. Well, that doesn't work anymore. You can do it right now. Who proved that? Andy Enfield at SMU, Pat Kelsey at Louisville. You don't have to wait anymore. But it's crazy the amount of money that's being talked about. But if you don't spend that money wisely, if you just hire this position and say, hey, we hired a GM, we're going to be great, but all the other parts of your organization were set up poorly to begin with under in terms of a mindset, boy, I tell you, you're just begging for trouble. And that's where I tell you, this is a big topic, and we're going to talk about it more, not only here in the month of March, but all throughout the off season into April and May and June and July, when the ACC football kickoff comes back here to the Queen City in Charlotte, because this is going to be an ever evolving topic. And some of the decisions that come out of this coaching cycle, of these games being played behind the scenes with big money donors and these administrators, and we're the presidents and all this, nowhere. I mean, it is a colossal mess.
This is the moment we waited for. Everything you want is right here. We gon' give them what they came for. We gon' take it up from last year. Shoot 'em my shot, boy, I'm long range. Me and the team on the same thing. Stayed down, never switched up. Only thing changed was the game. I'm in the zone now. Nothing can change what we on now. When I pull up, know it's going down. Foot on the gas, ain't no slowing down. Aiming for greatness, no settling. Kick down the doors, they want